Hello everyone, welcome back to a general SMITE discussion, JM or also possibly JAM photo, I'm not sure which one to use there. Um, I was requested to talk about builds. I'm going to talk about support builds first for two reasons. First, it's the role that I sort of introduced myself with on this channel. Second, it's the role I've spent the most time in. It's my favorite role. Third, JM identifies as a support main. That is what they primarily play. So we're going to talk about support builds first. Quick note to Miles Horton. I apologize. I meant to record some episodes yesterday. Unfortunately, I was hacking up both my lungs yesterday, and I couldn't get some clean audio out of yesterday at all because I was just coughing too much. So you will see that after this. I'll upload both of these at the same time. So it'll be a rare double Saturday. Um, but anyways, let's talk about builds. Now, for supports, the most important items in support builds are its first three. I don't know or care how everyone else plays support. I think all support mains can agree that your first three items are the most pivotal items for you to build in any given match in any given mode, because that's really going to set the tone for the rest of your match. And additionally, the early game is the hardest for supports because supports are expected, even in the early game, to be able to survive, to disrupt the enemy, to pick out and single out individual enemies, separate them from the rest of the group, to tank damage and everything. And early on in the game, you don't have the protections to do that. Now, I'm going to start by talking about the starter items because that is incredibly important. Now, I'm going to make a statement, one other statement, probably the last statement I'm going to make in this video, that all support mains can agree on. A safe pick is Sentinel's Gift. All matches can use this. There is no match in which, there is no single Smite game in which picking Sentinel's Gift is bad. It is always going to be an at least good item for you. There are a couple of reasons for this besides the protections, which, just to compare the other four specific items here. By the way, I am talking specifically from the standpoint of a Guardian. I'm going to handle non-Guardian supports in a separate episode. We're talking Guardian supports here. The other options are, of course, War Flag, which you can see offers identical protections. You have Benevolence, which does not offer protections. And you have Taunted Steel, which offers better protections. But what separates Sentinel's Gift from the rest of those and makes it a universally good starter item for supports is very specifically the 8 bonus gold per assist. Now, this is vitally important for supports because support is the only role that isn't supposed to necessarily kill people. Sure, you can, get out of my face. You can kill, enemies with the support role, but it's not your job. You are not in the match with the specific intention of, hey, yeah, I'm out here trying to pick up kills and everything. As funny as it is to say the best crowd control is death, um, partially true, but at the end of the day, you're not there to get kills, you're there to keep your allies alive and to disrupt the enemy. That's your job, that's why you're there. And as a result, you aren't trying to kill minions a lot of the time, which means you're not getting the full gold benefit of that. So without Sentinel's Gift or some other way of accumulating gold, you're going to have a pretty rough time in the gold department, and you're not going to be able to keep up with the enemy team in terms of your itemization, which, again, stacking on top of this, assists don't give you as much experience, so basically you'll be short on both gold and experience. Sentinel's Gift at the very least gives you enough gold where that isn't a problem. So even though Sentinel's Gift does not address the experience problem that supports have, quite frankly, MOBAs to this day have developed well enough that a lot of people understand, even people who don't necessarily play support that often, they understand that why it's so important for supports to have gold. If you're really new to MOBAs, the reason why gold is so important to supports is very specifically because supports tend to be underleveled due to the nature of their job. and so they have to compensate with gold. And Sentinel's Gift does that. It gives you protections, it gives you health, it gives you MP5, which is pretty important for supports as well. It gives you gold, it heals your health and mana as you get assists. It's a beautifully safe option. Now, I do want to talk about the evolutions of Sentinel's Gift because I actually have some strong words here. I almost never go into Sentinel's Boon. And there are a couple of reasons for this. First off, at that point, let me rephrase that. I don't usually build Sentinel's Boon in Conquest. Let me be a bit more specific. Sentinel's Boon actually works really well in Arena. It works decently well in Slash. It isn't really that great in pretty much any other game mode I've tried to use it on. You could probably argue it's decently effective in Assault, but that really depends on how lucky you are with your team comps in Assault, but that's a conversation for another day. Sentinel's Boon I really don't buy in Conquest because once you start doing mass team fights, at least half of those team fights are taking place somewhere that minions aren't. And minions are a really big source of these assists. Yes, you'll get assist credits off of enemy gods, but those only count as a single individual assist. Okay? If you're fighting in lane, pretty consistently, yes, Sentinel's Boon is great. But unfortunately, due to the nature of team fights and how they typically happen, these are usually centered around big jungle camps like the Gold Fury or the Fire Giant, or they're at Titans. These are usually the biggest team fights. It's not terribly often that a team fight will be in a lane, and if it is in a lane, it's not going to be in that lane for very long. Team fights, at least in this current meta as it stands now, team fights tend to be very fluid. They tend to move across the map a whole lot, if they don't end that quickly. But even then, a lot of that movement tends to be into or out of the jungle as the losing team is trying to escape and get away from the enemy. So that tends to move into the jungle if it didn't start there, and if it started in the jungle, it tends to stay in the jungle as a result of that, because people are trying to get lost in the jungle, or trying to lose pursuers in the jungle. So the jungle tends to be either where team fights start and stay, or where they wind up eventually. So Sentinel's Boon in Conquest, at the very least, tends to not be that useful. It offers you fewer resistances than, protections in Sentinel's Embrace, factoring in the aura. If you factor in the aura, even if you have allies nearby, if you have no allies nearby, you're getting 70 of each protection. If you have allies nearby, you're getting, at least, I'm having a total brain cramp. What is this number here? You're getting at least 46, not 45. So even if you have all of your allies near you, actually, it's technically evenly split, yeah. It's 16 protections to everyone if your whole team is close enough to you, which 16 plus 30, that's 46. You're still getting at least what Sentinel's Boon provides. You lose 100 health, I would say, at the absolute worst case scenario, but even then, 100 health isn't that big of a deal that late in the game. So for Conquest, at the very least, I almost never build this. I'll build this if I'm extremely behind, if my team is behind, and I'm way behind as a result of that, because unfortunately that's a kind of something else supports have to deal with, is if the team is doing badly, the support by nature does badly, by nature of their job. So then I'll build Sentinel's Boon in Conquest, but I have to be pretty extremely behind for that to happen, okay? Usually you're going to go for Sentinel's Embrace. Again, as I just covered, even in a worst-case scenario, you're still getting as many protections as what Sentinel's Boon is offering, but you also get to provide your allies with bonus protections as well if they're close enough to you. And even though it doesn't seem like it's that big of a difference, I just mentioned 16 protections very specifically if your entire team is gathered up. But 16 protections for people who already have low protections is pretty significant, because there's a whole formula that's used to calculate the how much damage mitigation protections offer you. And I'm not going to go through the whole formula because that doesn't really make a difference here. It's just to get the point across here. According to the formula, when you have 100 protections, you are seeing, what was it, I think it used to be 50%, I'm pretty sure they changed it. But you're still seeing a good amount of damage mitigation off of just having 100 protections. And most most characters in the game, most gods in the game, have when they're level 20, they're usually sitting at like 70 odd physical protections and 60 odd magic protections. Stack on 16, and you're looking at 70 or 80 odd magic protections and 90-ish physical protections, which is pretty close to 100 protections. And if the enemy team isn't building enough percentage penetration, which that depends on the meta, you can really help your allies a lot, because the lower the protections are before upgrading, the more significant the impact of additional protections are. Because the interesting thing about protections is they have what is known as diminishing returns. The more you have, the less they mean. So for your squishy allies, even 16 protections is going to go pretty far. So Sentinel's Embrace is usually what I'll go into in Conquest. Again, this is very specifically Conquest geared. In other modes, Sentinel's Boon might be a better choice depending on how your team is doing. Again, I still, even in Slash and Arena, I still tend to build this if I'm behind. You'll notice I didn't talk about the 6 GP5. That's because by that point in the game, by the time you're upgrading Sentinel's Embrace, the likelihood that you still need gold at that point isn't very high. Again, you would have to be actually decently far behind for that 6 GP5 to really make a huge difference. Because once you upgrade your relics, you might be able to buy potions of power, but a lot of the time, you're a support. You're only really buying those for 10% cooldown reduction, and you're saving up for 3,000 gold for Elixir of Defense, which, I mean, in the current meta as it stands, I haven't bought a Elixir of Defense all year. I haven't needed to. I'll only do it if I'm trying to flaunt my wealth, but I've always been pretty close to overcapping my protections anyways, and I'll demonstrate that by the end of this particular video, how easy it is to come that close to capping your protections. Anyways, the 6 GP5 really doesn't make a difference in most cases. I would say 9 out of 10 times that 6 GP5 means nothing at that point. It's nice to have, but it's not why you would want to build this, obviously. Let's now talk about War Flag, because War Flag is fairly interesting. Now, War Flag is really useful for heavily auto-attacking teams. As a hypothetical team, let's say I'm playing Sylvanas as a support, Izanami ADC, Soul mid for kicks, Arachne jungle, and Gilgamesh solo lane. All of these characters have great auto-attacks. So a lot of them focus specifically on auto-attacks. Great team composition for War Flag. But what if the ADC is the only auto-attacker on the team? You really wouldn't want War Flag then. So whether or not you want War Flag really depends on how many of your allies actually can utilize an attack speed or a movement speed boost. Typically, I'll usually set this for like 3 people with good auto attacks, including myself, depending on what Guardian I am. Again, I mentioned Sylvanas, he's a great demonstration of that. Otherwise, it's really not a great idea, and I want to tell you why it's not a great idea outside of auto-attacking focused comps. If you're buying this for the healing and mana, you're going to be in for a very rude awakening, because this only heals you and allies every 3 assists. Now, each minion wave is 6 minions, which means War Flag will heal you and your allies twice per wave. This comes to a grand total of 30 health and mana every wave. Compare this, and by the way, 0 gold, that's fairly key, because you come to Sentinel's Gift, and you're healing 12 health and 8 mana per minion, which winds up very specifically being 72 health healed and 48 mana healed, plus 48 bonus gold, okay? If you're building War Flag, it is very specifically because your team composition has a whole bunch of people with really powerful auto-attack damage. At least, my rule of thumb is at least 3. You can include yourself in this if you want. Whether or not you do depends on you, in your personal preference. But if you're not building this to boost your allies' attack speed, build Sentinel's Gift. The movement speed is nice, it's a nice benefit, but even increasing allies' movement speed for those that need it, there are better alternatives. And I'm actually going to come back to this subject later on. Now, I do want to talk about its evolutions because its evolutions are also fairly interesting. Now, the War Banner is fairly unique. And again, I want to also point out that while you do, it's basically just a beefier war flag. And I also want to point out that these stacks that you build from the assists, enemy gods do not provide you more stacks, so it's even an assist on a kill is just going to be 1 stack. Otherwise, they would mention it. Because on Thebes, you get 5 stacks per god assist. You don't get that here. So don't assume that that's going to happen. War Banner is just basically a beefier war flag. If you're building war flag for the attack speed, you're going to build a War Banner for the same thing. And then there's the Spartan Flag, which is really interesting from a support standpoint. Now, I see people use this a decent amount. This is something that works better for you if you're an auto-attack focused Guardian in the solo lane. I'll talk about that one day in a separate episode. But from a support perspective, you're losing the protections, first off, that you used to have. You're now getting magic power, which, as a support, you're really not going to need. The passive is really nice. When you damage an enemy, you call down a Spartan Flag, 10% increased power to allies standing in the radius. The problem with this is a problem I mentioned earlier with Sentinel's Boon. Teamfights in this meta are fairly fluid. They move around a decent bit. It's not terribly likely that a fight is going to stay within the radius of a Spartan Flag for very long. Even though it refreshes every 10 seconds, it's still just as likely you're going to move out of that one as the one you did at your very first flag of the fight. So while this on paper sounds very powerful, the way the meta works right now, it's not as useful as you would think. I've seen more fights move out of Spartan Flag radiuses than I've seen stay in them. You can make a difference if 2 members of your team have Spartan Flag, and then the idea, hopefully you basically alternate flags and you can keep your team in this buff throughout the team fight, but that requires some actual strategizing. Generally speaking, you're going to need to be partied up with that other person. It's usually going to be the solo laner doing that. And this still doesn't resolve the issue of gold, because at the end of the day, the hardest point of the game for you, the early game, you're still losing out on that gold. So by the time you get to the point where you're upgrading to Spartan Flag, you're behind on gold in all probability, especially if the enemy support built Sentinel's Gift. So again, at least from a support perspective, I don't like Spartan Flag. From a solo lane perspective, it's a good item. It has some function there, given the right circumstances. Again, I will discuss that in particular utility in future episodes. But from a support perspective, don't do it. Okay? It's not helping you survive. Yes, it gives you 300 health. Big deal. Health can be burned through fairly quickly. You're actually losing protections. You're losing movement speed and attack speed increase. You're losing the ability to self-heal. Self-heal and also heal allies, which War Banner offers. It's, from a support standpoint, it just isn't worth the passive, as good as it sounds, isn't worth the costs associated with it, especially when you sit down and consider the 10% increased power to allies. That is only really incredibly effective for mages. Think about it. The maximum power a physical god can have in this game is 400. That is the cap, barring passive abilities, whatever. It's 400. I actually don't think people build to that point. A lot of people typically sit somewhere in the lower 300s. They'll be 320, 315, whatever. Lower 300s. So most of your physical allies, and I'm even going to throw solo lanes in here, solo laners tend to be between 1 and 200 power, depending, again, on how they build, but they typically tend to hover in that area. And your assassins are also going to be hitting about the the low 300s. Usually, again, it depends on how they build. Sometimes they're in the late 200s. So your allies are getting tops at an absolute perfect world 40 power out of this, which is one item's worth. Yes, don't get me wrong. But a lot more often, they're going to be getting 30 power, 20 power, 10 power, or some kind of, depending on their specific power, I'm rounding here. They're really only getting enough power, power equivalent to maybe one item. One item of just pure power. Basically a tier 2 item. Right? Now your mages might get more out of this if you have them, because the maximum power for magic dealers is, I think, 900. It's either 900 or I think it's 900. So they can theoretically get up to 90 power out of the Spartan Flag. The problem is you only typically usually have one mage. Now, if you have a mage in the solo lane, maybe an argument could be made, especially if you have, again, enough auto attackers to make the war flag worth it early on. So maybe with multiple mages, Spartan Flag is a really good choice. It's the only scenario I've ever come up against where I could see Spartan Flag's passive actually being important and significant enough to a fight where you would be willing to lose those protections. Other than that specific circumstance, I really wouldn't go towards Spartan Flag as a support. There are better ways of doing this very job. I will talk about those. But that passive isn't worth it most of the time. And even as powerful as it can be with mages, the fight still has to stay in that area. Or at least your mages do. Let's talk about Benevolence. Now, Benevolence is interesting. Benevolence you build for one of two reasons. Either one, you want to build Animosity late in the game to deal some damage, and there's only a handful of Guardians that can make that work, or you want Compassion because you happen to be abnormally good at managing your incoming damage. I'll talk about that in a second. But Benevolence is fairly interesting in that if you play it correctly, it's actually nearly as effective for its purposes as Sentinel's Gift. It doesn't offer you the baseline protections that you maybe would want, but it does give you some decent healing, and it does give you potentially some decent gold. The weird thing is, and this is the problem I have with Benevolence as a starting item for supports, well, not near an ally god, which means you have to be kind of standing a healthy distance away from your ADC for this to start stacking. And that's kind of counterintuitive to the job of support, where part of your job is to keep your allies alive. Yeah, kind of defeats that purpose, right? Unless you are queued with your ADC or your mid laner, depending on circumstances, this is probably not going to work out too well, because not a whole lot of your allies are going to pay attention to the fact that you have Benevolence and you're trying to create a certain amount of distance, because you have to understand that anybody who's played the game for a decent amount of time and understands the basics of the roles understands you're there to protect them, and they will naturally gravitate towards you if they know if they have any awareness at all of what you're supposed to be there for. If they don't notice you have Benevolence, and few do, they're going to be running up to you for protection, and you're not going to get these stacks. Again, this can work with communication with an ally, ADC or mid. But in randoms, this probably isn't going to work out in your favor, okay? So treat this with caution. Now, I don't really have much to say about Animosity other than, again, certain Guardians actually can make use out of this. Sylvanas comes to mind, Atlas if you're feeling spicy, Terra if you're feeling aggressive. Guardians like that, they can all make use of this. Besides that, I really have nothing more to say here. Compassion is an item I don't like pretty actively. The reason why is because your incoming damage can rapidly get out of hand. Because a lot of people read this, it sounds really powerful on paper, and nobody really thinks about the complete lack of cooldown here. If you read through the ability very carefully, damage taken by allied gods within 70 units of you is reduced by 15% up to a maximum of 100 damage. Sounds great. Hold on. The reduced damage is redirected to you as magical damage. If you would die from this damage, it does not get reduced or redirected. Now, the 15% sounds like a huge percent to reduce your ally's damage until you realize that that's 15% capping at 100. So if the enemy does 1,000 damage to an ally and you have compassion and you're standing close enough, that damage isn't being reduced by 15%. The damage is being reduced by 100. It's 100 basic. It's basically 100 per ability. Well, per hit, I believe, technically speaking, per hit. Let me be real specific here because I really want you to understand why I don't like this item. So you're reducing enemy damage to your allies by 100 per hit, right? If a hit does less than 100 damage, you're reducing it by 15% then. So it's only a 15% reduction if that damage is under 100. Okay? Actually, technically, if it was under, like... Gosh. If it was under... I can't do head maths right now. But anyways, if that damage peaks at, like... Yeah, I can figure this out. Hold on. I'm just gonna math this out for you really quick. Yeah. So, at a... using calculation and math, if an ability does over 670 damage, or a hit does over 670 damage, you're only mitigating 100 of that flat. Anything less than that, it's being mitigated by 15%. So let's pretend, as an example, because I really want you to understand this, an ability does 600 damage to an ally. You're reducing 15% of that. You're only pulling away 90 damage from that. Alright? That isn't terribly impressive. True. That's not my issue with the item. My issue with the item is that there is no cooldown on this. Every time an ally is hit, you're taking a percentage of that damage instead. Which sounds like, oh yeah, this is my job as a support. Yes, it is. But the difference between you body blocking and understanding that damage coming at you, and the difference with compassion is that you're wading into a team fight, okay? Your allies are behind you. Abilities are flying everywhere. Your allies are getting hit, you're getting hit. You can see your damage incoming, but any damage your allies take that compassion is redirecting to you, you're not as easily able to keep track of. It does show it, but you're not seeing the ability hit you. You're seeing the ability hit the ally, and some of that damage comes to you. Every single hit. If you aren't really careful with this, you will be taking way more damage than you're prepared for, and you will die so much faster than what your team needs. Because part of being a support is also staying alive long enough to use your disruptive abilities to prevent the enemy from doing things. If you're dying in 2 seconds flat due to compassion overloading you with damage, and you're not paying attention for even a moment, you're going to die. Okay? There are certain guardians I will build this on, but they all self-heal. Sylvanas, Terra, Brain Cramping, RTO. These 3 as examples I would be willing to build compassion on. And that's it. Because most other guardians are going to be taking a slew of damage, and they're not going to be able to manage that damage as well. If you do build compassion on a non-self-healing guardian, I strongly recommend you start lugging around health potions, just to make that burden a little bit less on you. Because you can redirect it to you, and you can self-heal it, right? It's actually fairly useful and fairly interesting to build on Sobek. I've actually found a lot of use for this on Sobek, especially if my team composition doesn't have any kind of self-heal. Because if my allies don't heal themselves, then what I can do with a self-healing guardian is absorb that damage for them, at least part of that damage for them via compassion, and self-heal myself, thereby cleansing the damage basically from your allies. And again, this is specifically in the context of your allies not having a self-heal. This is also, by the way, a really sweet combination, and one of my favorite things to do with this item, as much as I generally don't like it, there are things that you can do with this. If you party up with someone who's really good with Aphrodite, Compassion is broken, okay? Because the Aphrodite, instead of having to connect to various allies to heal them, what just needs to happen basically is the Aphrodite builds just Soul Gem, alright? Maybe Pythagram's Piece. But the Aphrodite should at least build Soul Gem, and then just stay connected to you, the support, with Compassion. Because you're, taking all this redirected damage, and Aphrodite, instead of having, like I said, instead of having to bounce from ally to heal them, she just heals you, the support, with Compassion. And she's burning 15% of the incoming damage under 665 damage. She's just healing all of that away, but all focused on one person, you, Compassion wielding support, rather than the whole team. The Soul Gem is important because obviously Compassion isn't redirecting all the damage. Soul Gem is going to be there to send out waves of healing. Keep in mind that the bird flight hits multiple times, so that'll, generally speaking, the bird flight will trigger Soul Gem by itself. Multiple heals for your allies through Soul Gem. You get healed via the birds very directly, plus Soul Gem, and it's a really disgusting combination. Again, this tends to work way, way better if you're in communication with the Aphrodite, but it is an incredibly potent combination. If you have a mid lane Aphrodite, who you're partied up with and you're in communication with, Compassion will absolutely do amazing things for you in the late game. But as a general rule, if you are going to build Compassion, treat it with caution, buy health potions, because you will find yourself dying a lot faster with Compassion than you're used to, and if you aren't paying attention, you're going to receive way more damage than you're able to handle, and you're going to die well before you should be dying, okay? There are ways to break this, just not with randoms. Okay? So I just wanted to kind of warn you. I see this item built improperly quite often, and every time I do, well, nearly every time I do, it backfires, because it is about damage management, and this totally throws that out the window. Alright? I'm not really going to talk too much about Taunted Steel. This is the anti-heal. They say it's for solos. I've had pretty good success with this with supports in really desperate situations. If I'm not intending to build Pestilence or Contagion, for whatever reason, I'll pick up Taunted Steel. The only exception to this rule is Bacchus, because he's got an anti-heal in his belch. Alright, so that's the starter items here. And that's, the first item there. We're going to go on ahead and pick my favorite starter item, Sentinel's Embrace. I'm just going to be building as I go along so you can see how easy it is to nearly cap protections. So the second item that you pick up is equally as important as your starter item. Now, I was having a conversation, I believe it was with Gaming Dualities. We were having a conversation in one of my comment sections. Actually, I think it was two separate comment sections, over whether or not Gauntlet of Thebes is too slow to be effective in this meta. And I'm going to give you the TLDR. It really depends on how you play and who you play. Me personally, the way I usually play is I'm in the early game fairly passive. I don't generally get really aggressive as a support in the early game. So Gauntlet of Thebes works really well for me. Gaming Dualities, and Gaming Dualities has a YouTube channel, just as a random shout out. I've watched some of Gaming Dualities stuff. They're a more aggressive support than I am. They like to splash in a bit more damage than I do. They really go after the enemy a bit more than I do. They chase a little farther than I do. Nothing wrong with that. They're very good. They're very good at that. It's just a different playstyle. It's a different way of playing support. And for Gaming Dualities, I can fully see. I mean, Gaming Dualities has older videos, because the videos I saw of Gaming Dualities still had shoes as an item, and that's been gone since the past year. But even so, you can see the aggression in Gaming Dualities' style, which I love to see, because it's really great gameplay. But for Dualities, they're so aggressive that Gauntlet of Thebes doesn't stack fast enough for them to be useful. which I totally understand. So whether or not Gauntlet of Thebes is too slow for you or not is going to depend on how aggressive you are as a support player. I'm not that aggressive, at least in the early game, so it really works well for me. But if you're a more aggressive support player, and there are plenty of them out there, and there's nothing wrong with being an aggressive support, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. If you're a more aggressive support, this is going to be too slow for you, okay? It's something you are going to have to take an honest look at your playstyle and ask yourself, am I aggressive? Am I defensive as a support? And then you have to ask yourself, can I get Gauntlet of Thebes to work? Am I too aggressive for this item, or do I take the time and play it safe and get this stacked before I start making big moves? And you're just going to have to examine your own playstyle and make that honest assessment. If you aren't building Gauntlet of Thebes because it's too slow, and sometimes I'm feeling particularly aggressive and it's even too slow for me, that's usually my warm-up games that you don't see. But in those particular circumstances, I'm feeling aggressive or I'm playing a really aggressive support, I'll usually go for Sovereignty. I say usually because most of the time the enemy duo lane is a Hunter and a Guardian and you've got minions. There's a lot of physical damage there. In fact, the only magic damage present in that lane is the Guardian, who, again, isn't going to be building power at that point. So their damage output rarely is significant. There are exceptions to this rule, like Xingtian or Cerberus, but we'll set those aside, just mentioning them as exceptions for now. But most of the time, it's going to be physical damage from the minions and the enemy Hunter. So even if the enemy team comp isn't physical heavy, if Gauntlet of Thebes is going to be too slow for my intentions, I'll go for Sovereignty. Because that's going to be the physical protections I need to survive the minions, that I'll need to survive the ADC, that I'll need to tank the occasional tower shot if I need to. This is going to be the response to all of this. The only time I don't build this instead of Gauntlet of Thebes, my order of importance is Gauntlet of Thebes if I'm not feeling aggressive, Sovereignty if I am feeling aggressive, unless the enemy team is so obscenely magical that Heartward is just the best second item. And that usually requires there to be 4 magic damage dealers on the enemy team for that, which I've only seen twice this year in Conquest. I've seen it in other modes far more often, but in Conquest I've only seen a 4-man magic comp twice so far. So it obviously doesn't happen that often in Conquest. But I did want to mention it really quick. But generally speaking, in 95% of cases, you're going to be either building Gauntlet of Thebes if you're a more defensive support, or you're building Sovereignty if you're more aggressive. Alright? Your third item, it also very heavily depends on how defensive or aggressive you are. For me, again, I'm a more defensive support, so typically, my third item is going to be a second aura item, bolstering the protections of the dominant damage type on the enemy team, if there is one. If the enemy team has the usual 3 physical comp, I'll usually go Sovereignty. Right? Instead of Sovereignty in that particular instance, you could instead use Jade Emperor's Crown. Now you might be wondering, Professor, what's the difference? Besides the HP 5, obviously. What is the advantage of Jade Emperor's Crown over Sovereignty? Which one should I use when? Alright. Since they've given Jade Emperor's Crown the percentage reduction, it's actually become viable. The flat reduction to power was too weak in the late game for it to matter, and I never built it then. Now that it's percentage physical power reduction, this actually matters. But the deciding factor here is the enemy team composition. If the enemy team composition has a lot of auto-attackers, a lot of physical auto-attackers, say they're, besides the ADC, which is usually going to be an auto-attacker in the first place, say they have Arachne as a jungle, or Mercury as a jungle, or Naja as a jungle, someone with decent auto-attacks or damaging auto-attacks. Mercury and Arachne are probably better examples of this, but anyways. Or they have a really heavy auto-attacking solo lane like Erlang Shen. Jade Emperor's Crown is more useful because auto-attacks scale 100% to power. Most abilities don't scale 100% to power, so you are reducing their power and their auto-attack damage by an actual 15%. If they have 100 power, You're reducing their auto attack damage by 15. If they have 200, it's 30. If they have 300, it's 45. You can see how useful this can be. But again, that's very specifically auto attacking. Abilities that scale much less on power, you're not even going to be pulling away that 15 damage for each of those. That's just not going to happen. So for ability heavy enemy comps, Jade Emperor's Crown is the worst choice. You should build Sovereignty. If they're auto attack favoring, if they have a lot of auto attackers, Jade Emperor's Crown is the better choice. Okay? That's the rule there. And again, that's just because it's reducing physical power, which affects auto attackers more. But that's generally where you're going to approach that from. Okay? So either Sovereignty or Jade Emperor's Crown is my usual pick. Again, usually after the usual Gauntlet of Thebes. But if I'm feeling aggressive, or if you're a particularly aggressive support, you might actually be going in for good old Stone of Binding, which is a decent enough item for the early game. My only real issue with Stone of Binding, and the reason why I don't personally build it that often, is because later on in the game, that flat reduction to their protections really doesn't make a big difference in the late game, so I'd rather swap this out for something a little bit more hard-hitting, maybe Voidstone, maybe Mystical Mail, something like that, if I'm being aggressive anyways, but I will typically sell this late game. I would love for this to receive a third stage to actually help it transition into the late game a little bit better. Maybe the same passive, but it switches to 10% instead of a 10 flat. I would love to see that. Maybe boost those protections up to 40 each. Maybe get 30, 35 power out of this. That'd be great. I would love to see a slightly beefier Stone of Binding for a third stage. It would make the whole item more viable in my opinion. But if you are going to play pretty aggressively, this is a good, strong early game choice. Just keep in mind that later on in the game, when you've got the rest of your items, you've got your relics upgraded, you've got some gold kicking around, you will probably want to sell this because it's, at that point, definitely not going to be pulling its weight. Pridwin is also a great replacement for this, by the way. But you could do that. Alright, now if you're not going to do Stone of Binding and you're still looking to play that aggressive role, then very likely you'll want some magic protections, and if you're playing aggressively, you'll probably want Voidstone. Alright, now I'm operating on the assumption that you're an aggressive support, and you've probably built Sovereignty using the classic scenario because physical hunter, minions, etc. So typically, if you're more aggressive and you don't want Stone of Binding, you'll want to go into Voidstone. That's going to give you a little bit of power, it's going to give you decent magic protections, it's going to give you some health, it's going to help your allies later on. Alright? Strong contender here. If you have a lot of magic damage dealers on your team, or you just really want to do some damage on your own. If you're more looking to help your allies, you might instead go for Shogun's Gusari. If you have a lot of auto attackers on your team, great item. I think this is overutilized though, personally. I've seen Shogun's Gusari built on team compositions that only have their ADC as an auto attacker. These are comps like Anubis Mid, who's Horus Solo, and like a Khepri support, and I'm trying to think of a good example for a jungler. A Susano jungle, right? There's really not much need for attack speed on that composition, and I've still seen Shogun's Gusari built on compositions like that. And this is intended to increase attack speed, and a lot of people are going to justify this because I've seen this argument before. Oh, even if you don't have a whole lot of auto attack focused specific gods, this is still really great on jungle camps and towers. That's not strong enough justification. Consider the jungle camps. Gold Fury, Fire Giant. Abilities damage those. You're not doing your mage any favors by building Shogun's Gusari when you're fighting those, because they're going to be using their abilities on those anyways. They're not going to be looking to deal their damage in auto attacks unless they're Soul, Chronos, or one of the other auto attacking mages, of which there are less than 5. I'm sorry, I think there's 6 specifically. Let me rephrase that. 6 of them, I think. So unless they're one of those auto-attacking mages, they don't care for the jungle camps. And then you're going to be like, well, towers. Yeah, towers are one-shot deals, and about half of that damage is being dealt by minions, at least in the early to mid-game. Auto-attacks don't play as much of a factor in taking out towers as you think. They do. Auto-attacking towers is important. I mean, it's part of the hunter's job, for a reason. But a lot of that damage is also happening via minions, not through the auto attacks of your mage or your ability based jungler or your ability based solo laner. They're not going to be contributing, even with Shogun's Kusari, by that much more. Finally, you're going to come at me with Phoenixes. Yep, sure, okay. Phoenixes, true, they can't be affected by abilities. They can respawn after an age. If they get destroyed, there's potential there, yes. But are you going to be building an item as your... Do you want to be building Shogun's Kusari as your third item so you can boost the attack speed of your allies to take Phoenixes slightly faster if your team composition isn't auto-attack focused? Again, if your team composition is focused on auto-attacks, incredibly powerful item here. This is an aura you need to have if your team, broadly speaking, focuses on auto-attack damage. Absolutely incredible. But if your team doesn't, don't build this. Because there's better things you can do for your team than build this. You can build Voidstone. You can build Mystical Mail and splash in some extra damage, for Pete's sakes. You can build Heart Ward for some magic protections. You can build Pridwin for some cooldowns and use your abilities more often. Right? There are better options if your team does not focus on auto-attack damage. It's kind of the same thing goes for Talisman of Energy. Where would I choose Talisman of Energy over Shogun's Kusari? Very specifically if my allies don't have escapes. Anubis loves this item. Aposh loves this item. Guan Yu loves this item because his escape is weak as all get out. Artemis loves this item besides for the attack speed, for the movement speed. Yes, it does provide less total movement speed. It provides a maximum of 12% attack speed boost rather than the 30% on Shogun's Kusari, but it balances that with a 12% boost to move speed. And again, if your allies have no escape, they're running for their lives from enemies, and the movement speed boost can really help them out. It's also really good for chasing enemies as well, so it really depends on how desperately your team needs move speed, and also attack speed. It's something you'll have to carefully think about your team composition for, and these are the decisions I'm coming to at the loading screen when the game is being loaded and I can see both comps. I'm looking at my team and I'm thinking to myself, alright, do I need auto-attack boosts? If I do need auto-attack boosts, do I need Kusari or do I need Talisman? What are the move requirements of my team? Do they have enough escapes? Am I going to need to pay attention to someone very specifically and try to help them out of ugly situations? What's that story about? That's what I'm thinking of. And the decision of whether or not I'm going to go into Talisman of Energy or Shogun's Kusari at that point, if at all, that is being made at the loading screen level, okay? But just as a kind of an aside, but Shogun's Kusari makes for a good third item if you're an aggressive support and your team has a lot of auto attacks. Voidstone makes a better choice if your team has a lot of magic damage. Your solo lane is magic. You have a regular mid lane, but your solo lane is magic. Build Voidstone. Your solo lane is Erlang Shen. Shogun's Kusari. Alright, what if none of these situations are true? You go right into Pridwin as your third item. Pridwin is basically the default safe choice. Alright? If you're aggressive, it gives you 30 of each protection. It gives you 20% cooldowns. It's got a passive that does some damage, so you can use your aggression to, help your allies a little bit in the damage department. And it gives you a health shield that it will help keep you alive longer through your aggression. Great item. Fantastic item. And I would recommend Pridwin if you don't have the auto attack needs on your team. If you don't have the magic needs on the team, go for Pridwin. If you're not sure, go for Pridwin anyways. So, we've covered the first 3 items for both defensive and aggressive supports. We've talked about the various options. The next 2 items... Actually, let me grab the items I like to talk about. Do we have a thing that... I thought we had a stack increaser. Item stacker, yes. I just want to emphasize how easy it is to increase these protections. And then we'll grab sovereignty to represent the usual scenario, which is physical heavy compositions. You know what? Let's go into Jade Emperor's Crown. Let's make this a little spicy. Okay, so we've gotten our first 3 items, and now we're talking about our next 2 items. All right. These are what I call the flex items. These are items that change, that I decide upon very specifically in reaction to team compositions. Alright, these are not preset items for me. So we're going to generally cover the various items and talk about how they're useful. I'm going to save up the earrings for last for a reason. Now, if the enemy team has a lot of auto attackers, we just talked a lot about our team. If the enemy team is auto attack heavy, whether or not we have Jade Emperor's Crown, Witchblade is a strong choice. The aura reduces their attack speed, you've got a little bit of physical protections, you've got some beautiful and delicious cooldown reduction, great little item if they're auto attack heavy. If you have a lot of mages on your team and you didn't build Voidstone earlier for some reason, this is a great time to build that. I don't usually build Stone of Fall. There's specific builds for this. I will set up an example for this, but I'm going to pass over Stone of Fall briefly, at least in this episode, because that is an extremely specific build for very specific guardians. Okay, that's going to be its own episode. So we're going to pass lightly over this one for now. Over here, I really don't build anything else out of this tree for supporting other than Jade Emperor's Crown. Lotus Crown, if I'm Sylvanas or Terra, there is some use there, obviously. Very specifically with those 2. Besides that, Celestial Legion Helm, your protections disappear with this. There are better protection items for this. Your support, you really don't need the power. It's not a great item. Tyrannical Plate Helm, this is something I'll build as a solo lane guardian, but it's not something I'm going to build in the support role. Again, I really don't need power increases. I mean, boosting your minions is nice and all, but your job as a support is not to boost your minions, it's to boost your allies. So I tend to stay away from this from the support role. Again, fairly nice in the solo lane, but that's not what we're talking about right now. Cloaks. Here's a cloak that I have since found, because I used to use Hide of the Urchin a lot. All right, I don't buy this much anymore. It is very, very slow because you have to get a God Killer assist for 7 stacks. I mean, once you get those stacks, it's very powerful. But again, the first 3 items are so important for your gameplay as a support. They're vital. And unlike Thebes, which works for me because I'm fairly defensive, Hide of the Urchin takes too long. And the reason why is very specifically because it requires God kills and assists. Alright, think about it. Not a whole lot of kills happen early on in the game. You have to be abnormally aggressive. And even then, even if you're abnormally aggressive, let's say you go into the dual lane with your ADC ally, you're in communication, you're talking and everything, and for some unholy reason, you decide you want to buy Hide of the Urchin instead of Sovereignty or, given the correct team comp, Heartward, right? You decide, hey, I'm going to go for Hide of the Urchin for some reason. Okay, you kill both of the enemies in the dual lane, you get 2 assists. Alright, 2 of 7, great. You run into the jungle to go to mid lane. That takes a minute. You're in mid lane. You help kill the mid laner. 3 stacks. If the jungler is there and you help kill him, 4 stacks. Great. Move back to the dual lane. 2 more assists. After another minute or 2, 6 stacks. What I just described to you is a fantasy. Any support player will tell you, and if you're listening to this little fantasy of mine, you're probably laughing, because this is not how the life of a support works. Most of the time while you're in the jungle, your ally dies on your way, or the enemy retreats where they don't die, or your ally loses enough health where you don't want to be attacking the enemy at that point. Or you go into the jungle and your ADC dies and you have to turn around to defend the lane. There are so many things that can go wrong with this that what I just described to you, and it sounded amazing. Yeah, it sounded amazing because it never happens. Getting assists early on in the game as a support can be very difficult. It depends on a combination of timing, the talent of your allies, how coordinated they are, how willing to work with you they are, how aggressive they are even. Um, unless I'm working with a party, I am partied up and going into conquest, I'm probably not building Hide of the Urchin. Okay? Again, in communication, where you're, talking to your allies and you can set up plans, this can be very good, even early on in the game if you're an aggressive enough support player. But, generally speaking, I'm assuming most of you play randoms at least some of the time, if not most of the time, Hide of the Urchin is too slow. It really is. If you can get this stacked early enough, this is going to give you a dominating early to mid game advantage. The problem is it's an absolutely unholy gamble, a massive gamble, and at that point, for less time, you can still stack Gauntlet of Thebes faster and get more protections out of Gauntlet of Thebes than you're going to get out of Hide of the Urchin. Hide of the Urchin ends with 51 each. Gauntlet of Thebes fully stacked gives you 60, the 50 base of each plus 10 from the aura. 60. Alright. If you're an aggressive support player and Hide of the Urchin sounds like a good idea, just build Gauntlet of Thebes. It's faster, in all honesty. Besides that, there is I want to talk about this, there is the fairly interesting additions to the Meijis Cloak. Now, previously, because of the nature of support role, I would never build this, okay? Except for Khepri. Khepri I would occasionally build this on, because usually if you're looking at Meijis Cloak as a support, Spirit Robe is going to be better, because you gain an additional 15% damage mitigation from that, and you want to encourage the enemy to use their crowd control on you so they don't use it on your allies. And if you have a big stinking circle around you that says, I'm CC immune for the next thing, they're less likely to hit you with that CC you need them to hit you with, right? Spirit Robe is way better for this because they don't know that you're about to take 15% less damage from them, and you can just sit there and be stunned, or be silenced, or be asleep, or whatever, and Spirit Robe will just help you out by reducing that incoming damage for a little while. Fantastic. So up until this point in time, well, up until glyphs were introduced, let me rephrase that, Spirit Robe was my go-to for this, rather than Meijis Cloak. If I was seeing a lot of crowd control on the enemy team, I reached for Spirit Robe, not Meijis Cloak. Spirit Robe offered me more protections, and it gave me cooldown. And crowd control reduction, which is also nice. But now we have Meijis Cloak with glyphs, and Meijis Revenge can be really useful. I tend to find in personal experience, my discovery has been that this gets your allies killed more often than not, because they're going to see the mark for revenge, they're going to have 20% increased movement speed, and they're going to be rushing to do that 10% more damage. I also want to, point out that that 10% increased damage isn't as huge as you think it is. Kukulkan ults an enemy for like 1,500 damage, let's say, right? Actually, let's go really ballsy. 2,000 damage. Kukulkan swoops in and ults a marked enemy. Typically, it would do 2,000 damage. With that 10% boost, it does 2,200. It's 200 extra damage on 2,000. Decent amount. Sure. But why would you want to do this and increase your allies' movement speed to the point where they may die? Because again, you might be thinking, well, Talisman of Energy increases their movement speed. Yes, but they have the freedom to run with that movement speed. Meijis Revenge is a 20% increased movement speed towards the marked god. Towards the danger. Unless you're really prepared or, again, in communication with your allies, more often than not, this is going to encourage your allies to take risks you don't want them to take as a support, because maybe they don't have the health for it. Maybe their abilities are on cooldown. But they see that mark, and they're like, kill potential. Off they go. And I know for a fact any support mains listening to this know exactly what I am talking about. That's not what you want to encourage as a support. You do not want to encourage your allies to run into danger in a potentially negative, disadvantageous situation, right? But Meijis Shelter is interesting as a support player. When your passive is consumed, the nearest allied god gains protection from a single hard crowd control effect for 5 seconds. Or they gain 1 second of CC immunity. Basically, what this says in short is when you lose your passive, you don't lose it, you're just passing it off to your nearest ally for a little bit. That's great. That's fantastic. This is great. This is a lovely thing, given enough hard crowd control on an enemy team. That does depend on how much crowd control the enemy has. You might be asking yourself at this point, or you might even be asking me, Professor, how do I decide between Meijis Cloak or Mantle of whatever? Spirit Robe, excuse me. How do you make that choice now, today? It depends on how much confidence I have in my allies. If my allies have proven themselves capable of making good decisions and have good gameplay, I'm going to go with Meijis Protection here. I'm going to go with this. Meijis Shelter, excuse me. If I'm confident in my allies' ability to do what needs to be done, I'll go for this. If I don't have that confidence, if I think my allies are going to screw it up, I'm going to go for Spirit Robe. Because at the very least, I can survive long enough to body block for somebody in a bad situation, or get that cooldown reduction and use my abilities to maybe salvage something out of the situation if somebody goofs, right? So this now comes down to this particular decision. If you're going to address heavy CC compositions, that decision is going to come down to your confidence. Now, this is the 4th item I'm using here. This could be your 5th item, but either way, we're looking at least past the halfway point of the match. By that point, you should have a generally good idea of how capable your allies are in that situation. All right. You will need to draw on that first half of the match and think to yourself, if I use Meijis Shelter, can my allies use that effectively to actually do something useful? If the answer is yes, build it. If the answer is no, Spirit Robe. Okay, that's what that comes down to. I haven't really built Mantle of Discord too much lately anymore, since they reduced the protections down to 55. 55 is still a lot of protections. There are some Guardians that really take good advantage of this. But even then, because it doesn't address anything really specific, I still build this against CC heavy comps occasionally. Again, with specific Guardians. I find this to be really nice on Guardians that can lock an enemy close to them. Cabrakan, Khepri, Athena. Athena is actually almost in need of this because she already doesn't have that much crowd control in the first place. So adding an additional stun to her repertoire via Mantle of Discord is surprisingly really nice. Guardians like that can really lock an enemy down and keep them close by for extended periods of time. Kuzenbo. This is amazing on Kuzenbo. If you're in the middle of pushing somebody and somebody gets you down to within 30% health, boom, slap. Now, not only have they been pushed to oblivion, but they're stunned there for another second too. Glorious. Absolutely glorious. It's incredibly powerful on him, given the right circumstances and some practice. But there are specific Guardians I'll grab this on, but outside of those very specific Guardians, I don't usually build this anymore. Not unless I have nothing else to build. If you don't have Pridwin, you could also build Pridwin. We've already covered why you would want to build Pridwin, so there's that. For these two items, these two slots, I also didn't talk about Winged Blade. Obviously, this is just if the enemy team comp has a lot of slows and you need the magic protections. That's pretty self-explanatory. I don't really build it that often because slows aren't really a particularly scary problem for a lot of supports. I mean, we're already pretty much slow as I'll get out most of the time anyways, so it's not really a huge difference in our speed. But every once in a while, there'll be a team comp with a lot of slows, and I'll be like, well, I really need to be getting close to the enemy. I think I build this most often on Khepri, because he actually needs to maintain a specific distance away from the enemy, and slows can really hurt your ability to maintain that specific point. I suspect... Well, no, Cabrakan has slow immunity on his first ability when he activates that, so never mind. Yeah, it's primarily a Khepri thing for me. There are probably a couple of other Guardians depending on how you play them, but most other Guardians have a way of really consistently getting closer to the enemy anyways, through slows. Not really a huge deal. Every once in a while I'll build it, like I said, just not that often. But let's talk about these protections. Now, Hide of the Nemean Lion is not great, in my opinion. Because, well, the thing is, and my issue with it is, in situations in which Hide of the Nemean Lion would be good, I would rather have Witchblade, I would rather have Midgardian Mail, I would rather have something else. Because the problem with Hide of the Nemean Lion is, as nice as its base stats are, because 70 physical protections is really nice, the block stacks aren't as useful as comparative items. Consider Witchblade as a comparison, right? Witchblade reduces enemy attack speed by 25%. That helps your allies. Even if your enemy isn't shooting you, they're shooting at one of your allies, that aura is going to help your allies survive. You build Hide of the Nemean Lion, you're the only one getting those block stacks. You're the only one benefiting. Okay, this, again, is one of those items that actually is pretty good in the solo lane if you're against a ADC solo laner. Great item there. But if you're a support and you're trying to help your allies out, this is not the move. Buy Witchblade. Or, again, compared to Midgardian Mail. Enemies that successfully land basics on you have move and attack speed reduced by 8% for 2 seconds. This stacks, and stacks with other slows. In other words, while it is only really affecting you, the fact that this this effect lasts past you means when you go to body block for an ally, and the enemy gets an auto attack past you, it's going to be the only auto attack that gets past you because you're actively reducing their move and attack speed. Furthermore, while you're body blocking, their move speed is being reduced, as we just mentioned, which makes it easier for your allies to hit that target. If you're body blocking with Hide of the Nemean Lion as a comparison, you're not reducing their move speed. So they're just as difficult to hit originally, before as they are after the, as if you didn't have anything at all, right? You're just reducing your incoming damage, which is all well and good, but your allies are going to have the same kind of deal trying to hit them. But with Midgardian Mail, now I'm reducing their move speed and their attack speed. And finally, the last point I would like to mention with Hide of the Nemean Lion is this is every 10 seconds, alright? So when you first enter a team fight, you're going to have your 3 block stacks. You're going to lose those block stacks in the fight, obviously. And you're never going to see a block stack for a really long time. Because keep in mind that nowadays it's pretty easy to stack past 2.0 attack speed for hunters. So they're eliminating your 3 block stacks in literally less than 3 seconds. Every 10 seconds you get 1 block stack. Yeah, that's gone in less than a second. And they're blasting you with another attack, with another auto attack, before the second ends. That's a mild stretch. But you can definitely see where the issue is with Hide of the Nemean Lion. Block stacks on an item like this just don't mean anything. They're great on abilities, because you can build them, you can build up those block stacks while you're hitting people. Athena, Bologna. Great block stacks. Love block stacks on them. But when you put it on an item, there are just better items that do more against auto attackers. Again, Witchblade is an aura that affects all enemies regardless of what the heck they're shooting at. You've got Midgardian Mail, which reduces enemy attack speed, which also helps decrease your damage just as much as block stacks do, but it also decreases the target's movement speed, which means your allies get to hit them easier. There are better alternatives to this, basically. And I don't buy it. I don't build this, not in the support role. Breastplate of Valor, I've talked very extensively about. Love this item. Physical protections, cooldowns, mana, and MP5. Let's go ahead and build this and talk about the glyphs. This is, if I'm going to build Breastplate of Valor and I don't already have a glyph, this is my default, because it gives you 5 protections of each type, up to 4 times each, of each type. And then when you get all the stacks, all 8 of the stacks, you get a move speed boost, and your protections are doubled by this. So you get a grand whopping here total of 40 protections plus 20% movement speed for 8 seconds. The movement speed is a particularly interesting part because if you're building Breastplate of Valor in the first place, you're trying to use your abilities to disrupt the enemy, and having a 20% move speed boost makes sure that you're going to be in range to do that most of the time, right? So it's a really nice kind of reinforcement of what your intentions are for building the item in the first place. I don't often build the Vigilance version. If the enemy team composition is aggressively auto-attacky, and we're behind, I might go for this, because it does reduce basic attack damage by 15%. But again, we can achieve the same effect with Jade Emperor's Crown, just without the need for your ultimate to cast, which is obviously a lot slower. So in any situation, Breastplate of Vigilance would be nice. Jade Emperor's Crown is better. Okay? So just as an aside there. Besides that, Spectral Armor, I'm going to be really honest, I don't build this that often. There are very specific enemies I will build this against. Naja, namely. Beyond that, I really don't build this too often. I would rather have Witchblade, I would rather have Midgardian Mail. They generally tend to achieve a better effect. Okay? Again, this is more along a problem of this does not enough for my allies. This is entirely focused on myself. They're just better alternatives, like we've already discussed. Contagion follows the same rules as Pestilence. If the enemy team has a lot of troublesome healing, you build that. Which one of the two you build really depends on the enemy team composition. If they have a lot of physical, you'll probably want Contagion unless you've got other plans for your physical protections. If you need magic protections and you want the anti-heal, go for Pestilence. That's going to be down to the situation, really, and what you're looking to get out of it. I don't really build Bulwark of Hope that much in Conquest. It's something I tend to build a little bit more in non-Conquest modes, because that Health Shield is really nice in a team fight. I'm actually going to kind of lump a whole bunch of things together here. Let me really quickly talk about Heartward first, really quick, and then I'll lump those together. Hold on, let me grab this really quick. Amulet of Silence, I don't build that often. There are certain Guardians I might build this on. Ones that actually use basic attacks. Kabrakan's really good with Amulet of Silence, for instance. Terra's really good with this. Atlas, Cthulhu. But I still don't build this terribly often. Athena's great with this, by the way. Just because you get to throw the spear, you can actually use Amulet of Silence from a distance. Fantastic. I recommend trying it if you are against a magic heavy comp. Amulet of Stronghold, not bad. If I'm in a situation in which I'll be building Heartward, this can be nice. Because it allows me to build physical protections to defend against towers and phoenixes and still get some magic protections out of it, which is surprisingly very nice. It might not sound like a whole lot on the surface, but when push comes to shove, it actually is very useful. And now we're just going to do a whole bunch of lump items, and by lump items, I'm talking about 3 specific items. Bulwark of Hope, Genji's Guard, and Oni Hunter's Garb. These 3 particular items I will build if I need magic protections, but I don't have any other requirements of the item outside of that. These are kind of like my blanket statement magic protection items. Oni Hunter's Guard, I find, typically works best with those Guardians that actually have their own damage mitigation. I'm talking Bacchus, Kuzenbo, Guardians like that. Really incredibly effective on them because they already have damage mitigation. I will also be more likely to build Oni Hunter's Garb if I'm building Spirit Robe. Again, we're trying to stack that damage mitigation up. It can get ugly. That's generally where I use this, again, if I don't have any other items I'm specifically looking for, and I need the magic protections. Genji's Guard is basically the cooldown version of Oni Hunter's Garb. If I need cooldowns and I need magic protections, here we are, Genji's Guard. Beyond that, I really don't have anything else to say about this. Finally, if I'm dying a lot, or I'm playing really aggressively, or you're just an aggressive support and you're, again, looking for magic protections but don't have any particular requirements, Bulwark of Hope will get you out of a lot of ugly situations. Surprisingly very effective. This, even though it only comes up every 60 seconds, that's good enough. I mean, you only ideally will need it once per team fight, and team fights don't usually happen within the same minute anyways. So this usually is going to be enough for you. This is really going to get you in and out of ugly situations pretty quick. And it's just a really wonderful time. So that's generally the items here. Again, I'm going to sell this really quick. These are where I'll cover these two items here. Let's really quickly talk about earrings, because I don't like Sphinx's Bauble as a support anymore. 15% reduced protections can really hurt you, depending on how aggressive you are. If you're aggressive as a support, this probably isn't really going to do you a lot of good. Besides the fact it gives you increased power. Again, you really don't need that, and it's only increasing your cooldown cap by 10%, which isn't really that big of a deal anyways. I have yet, since this has been changed to this, I have not found a situation via testing or even in theory that's worth it. Alright? If you really, really like the 50% cooldown, go for it, but in my opinion, it's not worth the reduced protections. Alright? And again, I want to just point out really quick that I'm at 5 items. I have 325. Well, okay, there's a bit of a bias there. We're going to go ahead and sell Meijis so I can build Pestilence here really quick so we can have some... There we go. I have 325 physical protections, and I've got 272 magic protections at this particular point in time. I have tons of protections. Now, if I were to grab Sphinx's Bauble here, we would be looking at a really unpleasant drop in my physical protections of 45. That is a 45 protection drop. That is more than any combination of flat protection items. Any 3... Let me rephrase that. Any 3 flat protection items. That's more than any 3 flat protection items on the physical side of the board. Okay? You would need 3 items with 15 flat pen to match that. You are basically giving them 3 items worth of free flat penetration to get 10% cooldowns. And that's just your physical. That's just my physical protections as they are now. Same thing for the magic protections. Except magic flat protection penetration is even smaller. It doesn't even reach 15. It reaches 12. You're giving mages basically free substantially more damage, even though it doesn't sound like it's a lot. It really is. Don't build this unless you are some kind of cooldown fanatic. What I recommend instead in this tree are the 2 other items, which are very interesting. Manticore's Spike, which I've seen people use, so people are catching on to this one. This is really interesting. This is only really useful on certain more specific guardians, the ones with way more hard crowd control. For example, Ymir only has 1 hard CC. The rest of it is slows, so he isn't really great with this. Same thing with Athena, she's got the 1 hard CC. But you turn around and you look at Kabrakan, who's got 2 very accessible ones. That's fantastic. Sylvanas has his root. Kepri's amazing with this because he's got 2. Again, very quick ones. Ganesh is really impressive with this as well. This is fantastic on certain guardians. But then my only real issue with this is that you can pick up the buff as well, and you could potentially kill Steel with this by accident, which is really my technical issue with this. I mean, it's not really that big of a deal at the end of the day, but it's just something you kind of want to be aware of. It's not 8% of their max HP, because if you pick up the spike, you do double the percentage, and that turns out to be 8%. It's really interesting where I've actually found this to be incredibly effective at helping my allies deal with the enemy supports, which is very counterintuitive to a lot of support guides, and not something I normally say. I've said it before, though, with Soul Reaver. We'll talk about that. But Manticore's Eye is surprisingly effective in that role. If you really want to use Manticore's Eye and contribute strongly to your team, pull a surprise move. Pull what they call a pro-gamer move. slap somebody with hard crowd control on the enemy team, pick that spike up, and then immediately turn around as soon as possible and hit their support square in the face. Deal 8% of that support's max HP, because on the enemy team, the person with the most max HP in 98% of cases is the enemy support. And your allies, very likely, don't want that enemy support around because it's saving their allies. Slap 8% of that support's HP away. 8% is a pretty big deal. Alright, this can be a big difference between your ADC or mage dying and living, based on how quickly they can eliminate that support. Alright, this can be a very big deal. Again, this is only really effective on certain Guardians that have enough hard crowd control consistently available enough to make this work. Fortunately, it is a fairly quick... that's not quite the way to say it. It's a low cooldown ability. You can actually activate this a couple of times per team fight, which is why it's important to have at least two hard crowd controls, because you want the two hard CCs so you can turn around and do this as much as possible. Alright, in theory, let me set up a hypothetical for you with Khepri. Khepri uses his distance root, roots an enemy, drops a spike. Khepri runs over, picks it up, throws out a Rising Dawn at the enemy support. Enemy support is hit by the Rising Dawn because they're unsuspecting and not paying attention. They take 8% of their HP from Rising Dawn. Khepri turns around, abducts another enemy. That enemy drops a spike. Khepri picks that up, hits somebody hits the enemy support with another ability, another 8% damage done. Alright, because what's interesting here with Manticore Spike, and this is something nobody's talked about, I'm not sure how many people have even noticed that this reads this way. You hit the enemy god, they drop the spike. The spike lasts for 7 seconds, then you have 15 seconds to hit that person. Once you hit an enemy with the spike, you are clear to go for generating another one. That cooldown, technically speaking, is as early as you can hit the enemy. Okay? There's no internal cooldown on this. It is an entirely external cooldown, i.e., it's on the ground for 7 seconds, and then it's affecting you for 15. This can happen in the span of even, 2 seconds, if you're really well-positioned and fortunate. You can have this turned around in 2 seconds, flat, like with my example. And it works, okay? That's why I recommend this very specifically on Guardians with at least 2 hard crowd controls in their non-ultimate abilities. Okay, even an ultimate ability with hard crowd control would be acceptable, but generally speaking, if you're going to use Manticore's Spike, try and use it with a Guardian that has more than 1 hard crowd control on their regular abilities. It's very impressive. Fablest Hoops, I only really bust out for those supports that can heal. This is great with Sylvanas and Terra, obviously. And this is just to basically give your allies absolutely delicious shields, because 7.5% of their max HP isn't a ton, but it can mean the difference between life and death. And there's no cooldown for this. Again, these are just flowers all over the place. This is especially interesting with Sylvanas or Terra, because there are other gods that heal, obviously, and you could make the argument, you can play a support Hel, or you could play a support Aphrodite, that's fine, but what's interesting about Sylvanas and Terra specifically is that their abilities have the potential to heal multiple allies multiple times. Each one of these heals individually creating a flower. If you're picturing in your head Sylvanas generating a field full of flowers by healing 4 allies around him, yeah, it's a beautiful sight and it's something you want to see. It's rather kind of, by the way, interesting. This is just kind of a fun aside that I noticed. The 2 gods that I've found this works best on, namely Sylvanas and Terra, are earthy flower plant type people. Coincidence? I think not. Anyways, conspiracy's over with. That's gonna cover the 5 items here, generally speaking. Actually, let's have some fun here. Let's pretend Fablest Hoops, right? That's a good time. So we have all these items. Now, your last item is going to depend on whether you're ahead or not. If your team is ahead, not necessarily you, but if your team is ahead, you can probably get away with splashing a little bit of damage. And I've talked about this in the Ares episode, but I'd like to talk about it here in a little bit more depth. Um, Whenever I'm looking to splash in some damage as a support, just a little bit, I'm going to be looking at only 3 items. The first one I want to talk about is Soul Reaver. Alright? Soul Reaver is great for those guardians that have multiple damaging abilities. Again, Cabrakan comes up as a great candidate for Soul Reaver. Um, actually, both Soul Reaver. I build Soul Reaver and Spear the Magus on similar guardians. The guardians that have multiple abilities that deal damage. Cabrakan, Cerberus, Sobek, Terra, Artio. These kinds of guardians. With Cthulhu. Great candidates for these items. Now, whether or not I go for Spirit the Magus or I go for Soul Reaver really depends on the enemy composition, generally speaking. If the enemy composition is very tanky, I'll bust out Soul Reaver. And Soul Reaver, by the way, works really nicely with Manticore's Spike for fairly obvious reasons. We're talking max HP targeting. Same thing with this. So you can really do impressive amounts of HP damage with Soul Reaver Manticore Spike combination, and if you're playing Ares or Xingtian, you will see large quantities of damage on this. You try this with those two, it can be really ugly very quickly. You can deal a lot of damage just based on percentage of maximum health with these two. And again, this is more geared towards tankier compositions, which is great. If they're a squishier comp, if they're lacking in the frontline department, Spirit of the Magus is better because not only are you getting the 12 flat penetration, but because they're squishier targets, they have lower protections and they take more damage from sources. Meaning that the passive for Spirit of the Magus goes farther against squishier comps than it does against tankier comps. So, for the choice between Soul Reaver or Spirit of the Magus really comes down to how tanky are they, and then you're going to choose appropriately. Now, for very specifically Cabrakan, I sometimes go into Polynomicon. Sometimes Bacchus as well. Bacchus I've occasionally splashed in Polynomicon, but outside of those two, I really don't pick Polynomicon. I just wanted to have a brief moment there. But the actual general third choice I'll go for in terms of power is, in fact, Pythagoras' Piece. And this is only if my team is... I'll only really build this if my team doesn't have a whole lot of self-heal and isn't building lifesteal for some unholy reason. I'll go on ahead and grab a Pythagoras Piece so I can help out in that particular category. This hasn't really happened in this meta. I've only built Pythagoras a couple of times this year, I think. And even then, both of those times were in Assault. In Conquest, this really hasn't come up as an issue. It does give you some defensive stats. It does give you some cooldown. Specifically, it gives you health, by the way. Cooldown is really nice on this. Again, this is something I'll generally build with the more ability-focused Guardians as well, as a general rule. So, those are usually going to be the 3 items I'm going to go to if I want to splash in some damage on my support build. Alright, so let's just, let's grab Pythagoras, because I just haven't built that much this year, so let's just reference that. And that's generally how I'm going to approach building a support guardian, a classic support guardian. I really don't mess with too many other items. I know some people ask me, why the hell don't you build Gem of Isolation that much? The short answer is, a lot of the times, I'd rather use that item slot for something else. If you want to use Gem of Isolation in, like, your damage slot, if you want to go in that direction, that's fine. I just generally find slows to not be as useful as they used to be. Nowadays, a lot of gods have escape abilities that's going to basically remove the point in the first place. There is the occasional enemy team composition that has little to no escapes that this is actually very useful on, but those aren't very common. I think I've only built Gem of Isolation in those circumstances in Conquest about a half dozen times this year, roughly. it doesn't happen very often in this day and age, and I think as time goes on and as escape abilities become more common with the newer gods, I think this is going to be used even less as time goes on. There will always be compositions that will exist in which Gem of Isolation is very powerful. I just think the probability of those team compositions occurring as time continues is going to decrease overall. I'm not necessarily saying that I that Gem of Isolation is bad. I'm just saying that its situational use is slowly fading as newer gods are coming out. Time will tell if they change this to address that. And again, this remains really useful on certain specific guardians, Xingtian, Terra, people like that. Very useful. But most of the time, I'd rather have protections. I'd rather have a more dedicated damage item. It hits this weird niche, and I think a lot of support mains will agree with me. It hits this really bizarre niche of not having enough defensive stats to replace a defense item, but not actually doing enough damage in this particular context to actually replace the single damage item that I tend to splash in nowadays. It's at this really awkward position, and it's expensive for what it does. It's 2,700 gold. That's kind of expensive for a Guardian. Okay, not for a Guardian, but for a support specifically. That's kind of expensive for a support. It's the same reason I don't generally go for E-Staff. It's just, as nice as it is to steal stats from enemies, it's not that significant a lot of the time. Again, against tankier comps, I can see this being useful, but it also hits that weird niche of not being defensive enough to really fully replace a defense item, and it's not damaging enough where I would want to replace one of my only damage item for this. So it's not necessarily that these are bad, it's just that unfortunately a lot of the time they're not specialized enough in my opinion. They're too general purpose. Besides their passives being nice, but not being that hyper useful. In a lot of contexts, each of these has a context in which it is useful, but for E-Staff, tanky comps are all over the place, and that can remain useful, and if you like Ethereal Staff, that's totally fine, go for it. But for Gem of Isolation, those are some very specific circumstances that are slowly fading from the meta not even from the meta, but from probability itself as time is going on. So, with that being said, we're going to go on ahead and conclude the build episode here. Thank you all very much for joining me. If you liked this, please like and subscribe. If you didn't, please ignore me. And if you have any comments, questions, concerns, ideas, suggestions, or requests, please leave them down in the comment section below. And thank you all very much for joining me, and have a great 24 hours.